Well, it happened again. When I met Xavier Toson, when I heard him speak about Rotary and his Rotary story, I knew that I had met another kindred spirit, another kindred Rotarian spirit. Each time we meet those people again and again, it is another of the great blessings of our individual Rotary journeys. Xavier is an accomplished human being with many abilities. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran, awarded Airman of the Year. He started out and operates his own very successful business, Stash Media LLC, in his home of San Antonio, Texas. Xavier was chosen one of San Antonio's best and brightest business people in 40 Under 40 and chairs the African American Chamber of Commerce. He also served on the FBI Citizens Academy. He and his lovely wife, Whitney, are both past presidents of the Rotary Club of Alamo Park, Texas. They have a handsome, intelligent young son, Julian, who may be the youngest future Rotarian to ever attend International Assembly with us. Xavier is currently serving as Rotary, providing Rotary service as District Governor of District 5840. Those are just a few of the highlights of his service to humanity. Xavier is my brother in the only race I recognize, the human race. Xavier is here to share with us his perspective on how we, as Rotarians, can learn to recognize and begin to build bridges over racial divisions which separate us from our neighbors. Xavier, welcome.
Hey, Dana. Well, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be with you all in 5680 today. I have to say, I have to take you with me everywhere I go, Dana, because that was an outstanding introduction. It wasn't too long, and you summarized greatly. And I'm sure Julian will thank you for those compliments. I'm coming from 5840, and I'm happy to be with you all today, especially on World Polio Day. And Dana, thank you so much for sharing your family's story. And I'm so thankful that, everyone is here today. I'm here with a few, well, all of you all on this call are fellow heroes. I call our Rotarian friends superheroes because we're doing the work of God here on earth. And I just want to thank you all for joining in on this fight to support humanity in ways that if we were not here, I think it would be a great void in society. Today, I am talking about peace and justice. And so I hope that we can really share together. And I hope that no one is offended as we move through history, summarized greatly. But we're here because, well, first, before I get started, I think that COVID-19 and other diseases have shown us how interconnected we are. We started in Wuhan, China with this disease, and it quickly spread around the world. And as it trickled into our world, as we were living in our worlds, our inner worlds together, we quickly saw how we needed to adapt and overcome and work together to stop the spread of such disease. And I have to share that not only are we dealing with COVID-19 and it's spreading around the world, but we're also dealing with racism, injustices, inequities, and those are easily spread around the world as well. Now, I'm from Albany, Georgia, Southwest town, a small community, I think about 70 to 80% African American. And when you're growing up as a child, I don't know about you, but when you're growing up, you see the world from a different perspective. You're just living your life. The world around you is happening, but you're building mud castles and playing in the sand with your friends, no matter what they look like. But as you grow older, you start to realize that the world is not as fair as you thought that it would be. I took the first flight out of my hometown because I got a glimpse of opportunity. And I'm so thankful to be serving as district governor with this theme, Rotary Opens Opportunities. But I took that first flight out to join the Air Force in 2004, right after high school. I graduated in May. In July, I was at boot camp right here in San Antonio, Texas. Scared to death. I didn't know what the next step would be. I didn't know what life would look like, but I had hopes and dreams that I would become someone that people that I grew up with, my peers, my family, my nieces and nephews, could look up to. Someone that they can say he made it and he shined the light forward. I'm happy to say that the Air Force taught me a lot of things. I traveled around the world. I stayed in places such as Toson, Korea. I deployed to places like Djibouti, Africa. I stayed a little while in Bahrain and other places to get a glimpse of what the world was for other folks outside of the United States. I do have to say that the United States is definitely one of my favorite places to be. But we have our challenges here at home, right here in the United States. There's no country without challenges. There's no country without history. But I think that our game plan should be to help shape the narrative going forward. Because there's a few things that we must confront. There's a few things that we must look at history to understand how do we get to the place that we are today, whether good or bad. No, Dana shared a great story about well, I wouldn't say great story, but I would say definitely an impactful story about his family and how they overcame polio. Well, I want to ask, did you know that history repeats itself often? Back in the 1930s, when the polio endemic or pandemic happened and it spread around, African Americans were thought to not be susceptible to the virus. Most folks thought that the polio virus skipped over Africans at that time. But the truth is that there was a segregated South, the Jim Crow segregated South. And because of that, when the polio virus hit those particular communities, there was not enough African-American doctors that could research and send data to those facilities, especially in Warm Springs, Georgia, that was set up by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And so a lot of folks of my color were affected by this grave disease, but no one knew. And when they did start to find out that Africans were affected by the polio virus, the only reason why they got behind it is because it became politically embarrassing. So as we move into current day with COVID-19, when this virus spread, when it first came about, there wasn't a whole lot of data about minority communities. We saw it spreading, but we didn't really know where it was impacting African Americans. I'll tell you, when it first broke out, we were trying to figure out how we can, support the efforts because we didn't have it and we didn't know anyone that knew it. And then all of a sudden, within a few weeks or a few months, this big data came out and said that African Americans and Latinos were impacted greatly and seeing a lot of cases abnormally. And again, here we are, history has repeated itself. So we're faced with challenges where now folks of African American descent or minority, Black and brown, are affected by a virus. And now the healthcare systems are dealing with this pandemic in such a way that they didn't know how to deal with it before. But this was the same thing that happened back in the 1930s. So how did we get here again today? And how could we not have prevented the same occurrence? I think it's because we have to get closer to each other. Dana, you are my brother, and I really do appreciate the invite. And it's because of that connection and hearing stories through proximity that we're able to build empathy with one another. It's not a one-sided deal. It's an all-inclusive deal. It's a male and female deal. It's a black, white, brown, green, orange. I couldn't tell you how many colors there are. But when we become closer together and we get to share stories with each other without judgment, without bias, and we can really listen to stories that are happening around us, I think that's one solution that will help bridge gaps in communities, both locally and globally. I want to share an example of a campfire. We all love campfires. You know, you light the fire and you get your marshmallows, and maybe you're doing s'mores, and you have your roasting sticks. And we all build this fire, this campfire, to have fun and sing lullabies and tell old stories together. And the campfire, while it may be a great time around the fire pit and families are enjoying themselves, it comes with its own unique challenges. You have to keep the fire tamed. And when you're done, you have to make sure that the fire has been completely put out. Well, what happens when you don't put the fire out and you walk away? There's a chance that an ember could fly over into a uh, barren place where trees and grass has not been watered the way it should have been. And that small ember can catch fire. And that small fire can then turn into um, a grave fire that can destroy local communities. Hence, what has happened in California several times over. A cigarette could be placed somewhere in a dry patch and spread drastically around. Well, the campfire is the narrative that I speak of. It's what we think of ourselves as a nation, especially here in the United States. We think that we've built this place and it's all inclusive and we're all singing around the campfire, having a great time. We believe that we're the best nation in the world, and I'm being a veteran myself. I am happy to contribute to that notion. We have come a long way, but we still have places without adequate resources. We still have fires that are burning and embers that are flying over into places with untapped resources. And just to bring this analogy close home, what I'm saying is, although we have built such a great infrastructure in this country, although we come together to enjoy each other at different events around the nation, and we sing when everyone is joyous or we've completed a great mission, we have certain communities within the United States that lack resources, that lack equity, that lack justice. And so when things like George Floyd happen, that ember, it lights, and then the fire spreads into communities without those resources or just due equity. So although we've become a nation that is great and admired around the world, our narrative has to begin to change. We must come together to talk about where we are, where we're going, and who's affected. We must continue to look at history so that we know where we're going, not history to look at it and feel bad about the choices that came before us, not that we're looking to demonize people that are not even here anymore, or to place blame on folks who live in a different time in space. But we're looking at history so that we can report accurate history so we know where we're going. I think that's the first step. So first, we're looking at proximity to get closer, to bring more people in that don't look like us, to have more conversations so that we understand the world around us. That's the best decision we could ever make. But then also, as we hear those stories and we talk about our overcomings or our shortcomings, now we can relate. And now we can start to paint the narrative going forward. Now, there's another area where we have to paint the narrative going forward. It's in the media. The media plays a big part in the way that we see ourselves. I'll tell you, as district governor here in 5840, you plan for 3 years and you say when June 30th hits, I'm going to hit the ground running. And then, of course, COVID-19 hits and all your plans have to change. But not only does COVID-19 hit, now we have a social upheaval. It's the hardest thing to pivot on as an African American in this nation, because now I'm affected by things that I see, and knowing that now myself, my wife, and my little son, 2 years old, when we walk outside because of things that are going on around us, we have to now think with a different lens or see with a different lens. We have to say, when I have to say personally, as a young Black man, I have to think about everything that I was taught to survive in this world. Not only just being a man, but also thinking about, do not wear a hoodie. Do not put your hands in your pockets when you go into a store. Wear your glasses so that you don't look intimidating. These are all thoughts that flow through my mind just to survive, not just the pandemic, not just what's happening in the world, but just as a young African-American male. So there's different layers just to live for all of us. But if you're Black or minority, there are some different steps you have to take. And so there are some different, what can I say, there's a different tone that I have to take when I become governor. And it was the hardest, how can I say, split-minded deal that I have to kind of walk into, because I want to serve and lead this district in the way, but I also want to cry. I also would like to cry because I see folks who look like me being judged only by the basis of their skin. I think back on history and I think about riots that have happened around the world. And I look at the narrative of those stories on the media and I see the disparities. I see the differences. If we look at the Boston Tea Party, folks were fighting for rights. But there was also looting and rioting happening during that time. But it was also placed in the history books as folks fighting for a just cause. But in our nation today, we paint a narrative when we see those embers lit and now these wildfires happening, that these folks don't have a ground to stand on. Why are they rioting? Why are they looting? Why do they feel the way that they feel? Well, we have to get closer to the story. As leaders on this call, we have to get closer to those communities in which we serve in order to really understand what's happening. Truthfully, there's been laws that have been put in place. If we talk about the 1994 crime bill, yes, it was put in place, I think, for a good reason, to try to limit crime. But if the writers of that bill had been closer to the situation, I think that they would have found out that certain parts of that bill were not what was needed in those particular communities, or would gravely affect those communities, and therefore lead to locking up thousands upon thousands of African-American males. And so I think that as we get closer to situations and understanding what's happening, we would then understand what's really happening right there in those communities, and then provide solutions to those communities. As Rotarians, before we build a project in a foreign country or another global community, we always want to work with the local community to understand what's happening, so that we can build a plan that's not only put in place, but also is sustainable. And so we work with local Rotarians, hopefully, if we can, to make sure that what we're driving all our resources to has the ability to stand up in just a way that those folks can benefit for the long term. I think as not only Rotarians, but humanitarians, we have to do that same accord when it comes to peace and justice. We have to get closer to communities, perhaps build our businesses in communities. I'll be honest, we've seen when real estate agents who talk to both residential and commercial agents, when they come into communities, they say, hey, well, you don't want to go on that side of town because that side of town could be dangerous. So now that business doesn't have the opportunity to build in the area where resources are needed or people are in, they need assistance and help. Now they're building in areas where they feel there's less danger and more people would support. And that's the exact opposite thing of what we should be doing. We should be building in areas where resources are needed and folks need jobs and folks need opportunities, because opportunity is that aspect of life where you actually can get out of poverty. If it wasn't for opportunities in my life, I would not be in the seat that I am today. If it wasn't for someone saying, hey, come join my Rotary Club in 2010, that opportunity, I would not be here today. And so when we bring opportunity, we bring hope, which is that third aspect that we should look at. Hope is a beautiful thing. Hope is something that makes the darkest days bright. Hope is that ember that flies into a very dark space but lights it up. And so now we look at the opposite of a fire that could hurt us, but also a fire that could light our path forward. So we must continue to build towards hope. And I'll tell you, Dana, when you sent me the email and we talked about this conversation, it was very uncomfortable for me, because it is at least my truth that I can see the world around me and be faced with challenges and see how folks that look like me don't get true justice or equity, but still have to keep my other mind moving forward so that I can show that there are great people around this world on all sides of the canvas looking to paint a positive narrative forward. One thing that we're doing right here in District 5840, we're looking to build the Rotary Club of Equity and Justice. And this is not something that just has to stay right here in our district. But the reason why we want to build a Rotary Club that's cause-based, focused on equity and justice, is because we want to build that bridge towards proximity. We want to build that bridge that helps change the narrative, that opens opportunities or hope, and also a bridge that may feel uncomfortable at times, but it can work on both sides of the aisles. No matter which political party, no matter which, background you have or what your thoughts are, it can help bridge the gap on communications so that folks can understand that on the organizational side, if we're talking healthcare, they understand when an African-American male or Hispanic person comes in or Asian descent comes in, that their needs might be different as a minority. They may need different levels of care, but you won't know that unless you're having those type of conversations. And so the goal is to help educate folks along the way and show them where the needs are and where the resources are, and help bridge those lines of communication so that both sides are talking to each other instead of raising the alarm and everyone saying, why are you raising the alarm? Now you have an understanding of why the alarm is being sounded. I think as Rotarians, we're helping move that needle forward greatly. I think that the work that we do is on the side of equity. And it's on the side of bringing resources to people, and it's on the side of building hope. I've met quite a few people who were impacted by Rotary service. And when they reflected, they said, man, if it wasn't for Rotary giving a scholarship when I was in high school, I wouldn't have been able to go on and become a doctor. If it wasn't for Rotarians sponsoring my baseball team, I wouldn't have become a major athlete that now goes back and contributes to to the world or local communities in which I lived in. So I think that we're doing the work already, but our work needs to be intentional. We have to know that there are folks who are not on this call today who are trying to figure out when their next loaf of bread will be in the house. They're trying to figure out how will they pay their bills 3 months from now. They're looking at their pantry and they don't see much of anything to feed their 3 or 4 kids. And I'll tell you, there's a notion that says, well, why did they get themselves in that position in the first place? Well, I think that for folks who have been afforded the education to understand what their choices bring them, I think that I think we're able to paint a different narrative. For folks who may not have been educated on how to conserve a dollar for tomorrow, it's a hard notion to think about how to strategize for the next 6 months. There's a lot of us probably on this call today who know of things that we could be doing better, but we don't. And that's the answer. The answer is none of us really know. We've all lived this life just once. But I think if we built ourselves, or we've become people who can give back and educate and help each other understand by proximity, I think that that's the way forward. More conversations, more communication, more intention, and to make sure that we're moving that needle forward. And I think the right people to do it today are Rotarians. And I'm so happy to be with you all today. I'm so happy to share this message with you all. I hope that you gained something and gathered something from this message that you can go back and reflect on. And the 4 areas are proximity, changing the narrative, contributing hope, and also doing those things that may feel uncomfortable. And those things, the uncomfortable things, may be just doing research to understand what's happening in the world around us so that we can shape the way forward. So again, Dana, I'm thankful to your team for inviting me. It's just more of a conversation, so I'm definitely open for questions. But thank you again.
Xavier, as we started this, I think I hope you know that I never wanted to make you feel uncomfortable. But I know we need to hear from you. We need to see you. We need to start these conversations. I felt like you were someone that I could have that conversation with. And I knew that you were a big enough person to share that with a bigger world. And I think your message is one that needs to be heard throughout Rotary, because that can amplify what you're saying. And you've helped teach my heart, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, my friend.
We did have a question come up in the chat box, I see, Xavier, and that's from Dave. He's wondering, because of how the story of the Buffalo Soldiers impacted him on a way to gain better understanding. Is there a way to tell that story to help bridge the gaps that we encounter?
Yeah, there's been so many stories throughout history, and when we talk about bridging the gaps, we're talking about that proximity factor, and proximity happens through intention. That means getting out of your door, getting out of your house, and befriending someone who is not even on your side of town. Perhaps even inviting a friend on Facebook, just adding him, just to understand what world are they living in, and how you can either contribute or how you can understand, so that there's a commonality. I don't know about you all, but when you first walk into a networking event, there's a little bit of fear in there, but you say, you know what, I got to get in here with some intention. I got to meet some folks so that I can do some business or either build my community, my networking community. And so it's the same thing across the gap, right? We're looking at maybe an area of communication that needs to be enhance, but the first way to do that is through building that commonality, understanding what separates our differences and how we can have better conversations along the way.
Xavier, I personally want to say thank you for your presentation. It was well received. You did an excellent job, and I too share your comments. Well done, my man. You keep it up. We've got to spread the word throughout not only our districts but the world itself, and particularly the United States as a whole. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We have several people who are echoing those sentiments. So thank you, Ivanhoe, for doing that.